Hello and welcome to the pod day 3 live post draft. Um, so now the draft's over, we're going to go through kind of the 5 picks the Dolphins had today in the 4th and 5th round, and then try and catch up on the undrafted class as it comes in. Dolphins have been pretty aggressive, in particular with linebackers, I think already 4, and then some special teams guys. So first I guess we'll start with my guy, Jamil Douglas, who I really like. It's good to hear, I think, Hickey's first words were, we see him as a left guard. I think that's his perfect position. Really quick hands and feet. The only kind of question mark about him is his kind of nastiness. So a couple of people have called him soft or like a finesse player. I would assume that's coming from kind of more gap scheme coaching stuff or scouting stuff. So that's when you'll hear things like finesse, whereas a zone blocking team, they'll call that athletic. Because his punch is really good, his hand placement's good. So I'm not too worried. I saw some people saying that his question marks are in the run game. I think that was on Bleacher Report. I disagree with that. I think that's his strength. His issues, if anywhere, is going to be in pass protection. But at left guard, you're getting kind of help from the center predominantly, and sometimes the left tackle. So I'm not too worried about that. And he kind of has the athletic traits that you can project to him, being more than capable in that phone box. So have you got any thoughts on Jamil?
Yeah, it made a lot of sense. And Miami was almost caught with their hands down in the 4th round because that guard position, was addressed pretty quickly. TJ Clemmings went to the Vikings, followed by Trey Jackson to the Patriots, and then I believe it was Ari Kwanjo to the Redskins. And then that all happened right before Miami picked. And so, thankfully those weren't zone blocking teams. I think Douglas, it made sense. They showed interest in him at the Senior Bowl, and he's really a perfect fit for the scheme. I understand. I kind of agree. I think he might need to add a little bit of strength for pass protection, especially. But overall, he was playing tackle for most of his time at Arizona State. He did spend some time at guard. Was blown off the ball a few times, and especially as an underclassman, you want to figure out exactly what's going on with there, but. I really like the fit. Athletically, he's a great fit. I think he's going to come in right away. Certainly going to challenge Dallas Thomas for that left guard position. I would like to see him start over Thomas, of course, or at least have the opportunity to. My only concern is I wonder if they're going to look at him the same as Shelley Smith, where Shelley Smith struggled a little bit in pass protection. Not that Dallas Thomas didn't, but I think they're kind of similar in how they play.
I'd say that I think the issue with Shelley Smith is he was really one-handed, and they were kind of moving him around between places. For me, Shelley Smith kind of has to play at left guard, but they kind of moved him around, so he didn't really get his kind of footing in. You could kind of argue that the issue of Dallas Thomas is similar to the issue with Jamil, where it's kind of lower base strength, although I think Jamil's slightly more athletic and got a nastier disposition when it comes to his hand use anyway. But I've been kind of a big proponent of him for quite a while, so I was really happy with the pick. I think it was pretty good value.
Yeah.
Kind of looking at kind of how the draft board was falling, I think I had a couple of guys ahead of him, but they seem to drop quite a bit, and so you assume that's for kind of health reasons. The only guy, Glowinski, he's maybe more of a projection, but maybe has more upside just kind of athletically. So he was the one player that doesn't have kind of off the field issues or like health concerns that I had above. But for the Dolphins, I think Jamil is more of an instant contributor. In regards to playing left guard, and I think it's good that both Hickey and the coaches are talking about Jamil as a left guard and Billy as a right guard, because I think that was one of the issues with the line last year, was kind of how everyone was moved around the whole time, and particularly with young players in new positions, you want them to get lots of reps at that position and build up that muscle memory. So that I guess we can get on to the next pick, which is Bobby McCain, a player I think both of us like. I think he can play inside and outside, kind of has that versatility, tested really well, lower body half. Lots of people just say he's undersized, going kind of off the trend of big corners, but he's a prototype size for the Dolphins pretty much. So what's your take on Bobby?
Yeah, I was able to watch him all year. I had the AAC at Big Ten for Optimum Scouting, and so I was able to watch him all year. And he's a playmaker, and I'm really happy that they were able to get him. Obvious target, like you said. I mean, he's exactly what they look for. I liken him to a guy like Cortland Finnegan. I think he can play outside for Miami. Most other teams, he's going to be a slot guy, and he may end up being in the slot for Miami. I just really like it. And I said it on Twitter, he's a playmaker. This is a guy, he has great ball skills. And to see Senquez Golson go 3 rounds earlier is something really interesting for me, because I think they're very similar as far as like their skill set, their talent. I don't think McCain is necessarily a 5th round pick if Golson's a 2nd round pick, just comparison's sake. So I really like it. And I'm not a huge fan of those smaller cornerbacks, but for what Miami runs, he's perfect. And I think he's really going to push Will Davis. I really have to wonder now, if everyone is healthy, does Will Davis make the roster in 2015? Because I feel pretty confident that McCain is better. Just overall. I mean, he's much more consistent. He's a 4-year contributor for Memphis. He was a team captain since he was a junior. The guy's just, as a person, everything I could dig up on him for Optimum, which we go pretty deep on character, everything I found on him was really, really impressive.
And the Finnegan comp, I think, is good. In particular, looking at kind of how he plays against the run, he's not afraid to tackle. He's pretty aggressive for a smaller player, and so that's generally an issue when you see a player like Grimes, maybe as an example of someone that will have a couple more missed tackles because of their size and they can't take a player to the floor. McCain doesn't have that issue, so kind of playing in the slot closer to the line of scrimmage in the Dolphins scheme, where you're almost kind of we ask them to blitz a bit more and be a bit more physical in the run game, obviously, because you're closer to the ball. So I think that's kind of a nice comparison to the physicality of both their games. I would say that the thing I really like about Bobby McCain's game is how he breaks on the ball. He's really aggressive, really loose hips. What I think where he needs to improve is technique-wise in his drops. They're a bit sloppy, so that's going to be, and maybe that helps being on the slot as well. You're not playing deep as much because you have that safety over the help in the middle. So that's going to be one area where he can improve, and maybe that's where you see in 2-3 years when he improves that kind of just the fluidity and kind of maybe it's just even trusting himself that he'll be fine. He just is just a bit messy. And it's something we saw with Walt Aikens last year to a larger extent. He was also kind of clumsy getting out of his back pedal, where that's where Bobby McCain's a bit better, like breaking on the ball. But yeah, just if he can improve that back pedal, I think he can be a perimeter defender to quite a high level. Have you got any more McCain takes, or should we get to, I guess, the fan favorite pick?
Yeah, we can definitely move on.
So we kind of laid the groundwork for this, kind of saying probably we've kind of fought in the 4th round. He's born in London, so there's going to be that marketing opportunity when in week 4 it's Jay Ajayi, the running back out of Boise State. So he'll team back up with Jamar Taylor. So that's kind of a nice story. I think Jamar kind of, from the way in which he kind of presents himself, he seems to like having kind of friends around the team. So I think that would be kind of an advantage to him, and quite a big year for him to have kind of like almost have to go into a mentorship role and maybe take on some responsibility in that ilk. But Ajayi is obviously one of the most talented backs in this class. It's obviously the knee issue that dropped him. In regards to the knee issue, I've listened to kind of quite a few things. I'd recommend listening to the Football Guys first round live hangout before the draft. They were kind of talking about him, and Gene Bramble, who does kind of all their medical stuff, was talking about it in quite in depth. So if you want to get like a more professional take than kind of my drunkenly misinterpretation of what he says. But then there's a couple of things. I think there was a Ross Tucker or a Fantasy Feast Eating where they were talking about Ajahi's as well. But basically, he'll be ready for day one. He'll be ready to play now. It's an injury from about 3 years ago. He played every game since coming back. The issue will be if he gets hurt, it's really bad if he hurts the same knee. But the chances of him hurting that are slightly more increased, but no more than a normal tear. So it's more when there was like tweets out saying he could play for 4 weeks or he could play for 4 years. To an extent, that's the same with any player. It's maybe highlighted more as one catastrophic. If he gets injured in that one knee, which can happen to any player, it has a worse effect on him. But the chance of that injury isn't any more likely than Todd Gurley hurting his knee again, in theory. So I guess that's kind of the injury concern. Do you have anything to like point out on the injury-wise, or do you want to get into kind of like talent-wise?
Yeah, I just thought it was ridiculous. And I mean, I was calling out, and the one guy that kept doing it was Dane Brugler. And I mean, I respect Dane, of course. But it's like literally every player you could say that about. If you take a helmet to the knee, your career's done. Like, it's
like saying Albert's injury prone because he had a defensive lineman roll up on his knee last year.
Right. Right. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And it's like, yeah, he doesn't have cartilage in his knee. Okay, so what's that mean? That means he's probably a little bit more unlikely than a normal running back to reach a second contract. The guy had 2 years of being a workhorse. There were no side effects that we saw. He's not literally just going to pull up in the middle of like the second game of the year, just randomly and be like, "Oh, my knee's toast. I'm done."
He spent 2 years. He played a lot of football before this. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
this didn't just happen.
Play after it. It's not like the issue with Gurley is we've never seen him cut post-operation. We've seen him on a treadmill, but we also saw Dominic Easley on a treadmill, and he really didn't play up to his pre-operation level. That first step was definitely missing from Easley's game. But we've seen Ajahi post-operation for 2 years, 3 years, so there's no kind of question mark on whether it's affected his ability. And you're spending a 5th round pick, so do you really care about the fifth year? To me, this was like the perfect scenario where you're getting one of the top 4 backs in the class, potential, and like I had the top 5 backs all pretty close together. So there's not a huge difference, but then you're paying a lot less, and it's, for me, it's a great deal. If you think about if you make Phillips the 5th rounder and Ajahi the 2nd rounder, it makes, or me personally, feel a lot better about kind of the class as a construct. There's a lot of kind of talk about him winning the job over Lamar Miller. So I guess for one, it's not one job that we have in Miami. We're always going to have a split backfield. There's probably never going to be someone taking 20 touches unless they get really hot. That's a coaching mindset. It's probably good for both backs. It means they're going to be fresher for longer in the season. It's not a negative thing. It's negative when your second back is Daniel Thomas, but that's not a issue of the philosophy. That's an issue of the talent. So kind of, have you got any thoughts on kind of how he complements Miller, and then kind of some of the traits in his game? I think a lot of people have kind of heard about him, but if there's any kind of aspects of his game that really stand out to you.
Yeah, I mean, the negative on him is he looks to bounce a lot of his runs to the outside. You can go both ways with that. When I watched him, the one thing that I noticed was, and I kept thinking to myself, is like, this is literally watching a guy 1 against 11. he just didn't have much help around him. Boise State didn't really have a consistent, legitimate passing game to really open things up for him. And I think that it'll be interesting to see whether or not, I think he's a really good zone fit. It'll be interesting to see if that, if he's even better than maybe what I'm thinking he'll be, kind of like how Lamar Miller has gotten better at reading cuts, acting on his cuts. I think Ajayi can do the same thing. I think he can grow a little bit, and he can do even better, especially with Miami's offensive line if Douglas is in there, because they're going to make some massive running lanes. If everyone's healthy and they have the starting five that they should, it's going to be a lot of holes to run through. And I really like Ajayi. He's got good power, good speed. I mean, he really checks all the boxes. I mean, I had him as a second-round pick, not too much further below from Gurley, who is my number one back. I think he's a great system fit. I look at him stylistically, he's similar to Marshawn Lynch. Not quite as powerful, not quite as consistent with that power as well. So talent-wise, I don't think he's quite there. But if you're looking for a style, he's a little bit more of a bruiser. And I think it'll really help Miller, who had the same type of rep coming out of college, that he's injury-prone, or there's injury concerns or whatever it may be. I think having those two spell each other, I think it's going to be really nice. And it's going to be tough for defenses because then you've also got Damian Williams as the third back. So altogether, they've got a pretty good backfield now.
And his feet project to his vision being good. Like his feet go like before his eyes. So he's got like really quick feet. They're not happy feet, but they're quite quick, decisive. So that's kind of one of the traits I particularly like with him. He's a better passing option as well. Good hands, like a solid receiving option. So I think that for this offense, I think that's something we're really missing. Lamar Miller's obviously talked about trying to add it into his game over the off season. So if you have Miller as kind of being a bit more effective in the passing game, and then you also have Ajayi with that same kind of ability to even flex out and play in the slot, or the screen game, which has been kind of not as used as much as this offense would conventionally use it, either if you're looking at the passing game as the Saints offense or the running game as the Philly one. Both of those, they supplement their running game with like a screen game. So perhaps we'll see that implemented more now with this addition. So we'll move on to the third, fourth round pick, who was Cedric Thompson. So this, I guess, would be my biggest or second most reach. I didn't have him as a draftable player. He's a pretty good athlete, so I can kind of get the pick. To me, his instincts weren't particularly great, and he made up for those lack of instincts with his athleticism. He's pretty versatile, can play single high, can play the line of scrimmage, so that kind of goes with the wanting to mirror their safeties. And perhaps he's maybe more suited to playing a bit more free safety. But I think for the most part, this is kind of indicating the Dolphins' intention of always having two safeties that can go single high and then also drop in the box and be run support. Do you have it? Are you a bit more excited about Cedric ability, or is it kind of along the same lines?
Yeah, the only difference I think that I had from that was I had him rated as I think a fifth or sixth round talent. So for me, one of those fourth round picks was pretty good considering this draft, because shortly after he was taken, if you look at the guys picked in the 6th and 7th round, it was an atrocity. I mean, I like to think I go deep with the draft. I legitimately may not have known more than like a third of those names in the 6th and 7th round. Like, teams were just taking those UDFA flyers left and right shortly after Miami picked their final pick. And it's because it's not a deep draft. And I think teams are just like, whatever. These guys aren't going to make the team anyway, but we're going to stick them on our practice squad. So I like Cedric. It's a 5th round pick. And I think you take that, especially if a guy like Delmas doesn't come back fully healthy, if Akins doesn't necessarily show improvement, it's a nice safety pick with a little, like you said, a little bit of versatility. He's got the experience. He's been at Minnesota for a while now. Came from a really talented secondary, actually. It's a nice pick. If I were to grade it, I'd say it's like a C plus, which is like about average. It's what you should probably expect from like 5th or 6th round.
And then maybe kind of the most controversial pick, just kind of like the way it ended up playing out, is Tony Lippett. So to me, I evaluated him as a wide receiver, and I kind of saw a poor man's Devontae Parker. So it's quite interesting then when it came out that the card actually had him down as a defensive back, which he played, I think, 2 games or 3 games as a defensive back for Michigan State. So maybe do you want to talk about like how you see Lippett, and then kind of how do you think he fits as a defensive back? Later in the presser, they talked about him as a corner specifically, but we did have that last year with Walt Aikens, who was then moved to safety. So perhaps it's kind of projecting, and then once the coaches get their hands on, that may not manifest itself.
Yeah, it's really surprising that they would announce him as a defensive back. For some teams, I can get that, but Miami's defensive backfield now is pretty full. Like before that, by adding Cedric Thompson, to me, that was like the final move. And I just don't understand what Lippett's going to do for the Dolphins in the secondary. He did well at cornerback. So I watched those games again. I covered the Big Ten. I've seen a lot of Tony Lippett. I really like him as a receiver, like in terms of his skill set, his size. The way he got better from 2013 to 2014 makes me think that he could replace Rashard Matthews on the active roster right now. If you just consider everything, if you consider like cost, skill set, I think he's right now probably even par with Matthews. So, it's interesting to me that they would announce him as a defensive back. I don't see him making the roster as a defensive back unless if he shows to be some like savant at press coverage. And Miami's all of a sudden swayed to go like one cornerback press and then the rest of the defense zone. So
maybe we can like look into this as maybe it's a Tannenbaum pick for like upside for potentially if there's if this year goes badly for this coaching staff. And then it's like obviously Hickey and Tannenbaum both came from organizations that had large press corners. So potentially it's kind of setting the groundwork just in case they want to switch up defenses. So that's kind of my take from it. It's interesting. It's particularly just because his skill set is so similar to, or maybe his like body type. He's like a long strider, deceptive speed, good body control, good hands. It's like he is just a poor man, Devontae Parker. So then to take the same player and obviously covet those traits and that style of player, to me is peculiar. And is there any kind of last take from that 4th round? I guess it was interesting they didn't move anywhere. It did sound like in the pre-draft presser, Hickey kind of hinted at they were trying to get up into the 4th. Do you kind of have any idea, looking at who they went on to take in the 5th, who they may have been going up for? Maybe that was still to get another corner instead of Bobby.
Yeah, maybe that was the case. I think it worked out well for them. I mean, the only pick I'd make a complaint about is Lippett, and it's not even like I don't like Lippett. For me, I think I had him as like a 4th round pick. So, I mean, I thought the value was actually pretty good. It's just that, like you said, he's like a poor man's Parker, which isn't too much further from Rashard Matthews. So I just don't really understand like the
how he's going to be used, where he fits in.
Yeah, and I just keep coming back to that, and I don't hate the pick. Like I said, it's a 5th round pick, so it is what it is. I just would have liked to seen a guy like Jeremy Davis. If you're going to be taking an upside guy in the 5th round, take a guy with great athleticism. Don't take a guy with, average athleticism. To me, it's like the Arthur Lynch pick last year, where, I was a little excited about that one at first, and then as the season got near, I think I kind of realized like this is probably a wasted pick.
I was kind of the opposite. I was like, this either means we're cutting the on Sims, or like I didn't see how those two players operate in the same team. Or like maybe why you need them both.
So maybe this means that Rashard Matthews will become like a key role player in 2015. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I don't hate the pick. He can play. Like if Miami ends up giving up on him, he's going to make a roster somewhere. So he's a good player. It's just that's the only one I'm scratching my head at. I don't understand it. If it was a team like Seattle, I would understand it because they have a history of moving guys from wide receiver to cornerback, and they like that length. Miami doesn't really like that length. Like we talked about on Twitter, his vertical jump wasn't impressive enough to really make Miami as a defensive back. So it's just
his lower body is
fit.
really all his jumps were terrible.
Yeah, and you could tell, like watching him on film, he was he's a kind of previous guy.
Yeah, but he's got a good lower body, kind of movement skill. He kind of wastes some steps in his route running. If we want to talk about him as a wide receiver, he needs to improve a lot as a wide receiver, but he has some nice releases off the line of scrimmage. So perhaps you can project that to being kind of quick feet out of his breaks, but I mean, it's kind of tough. I only watched one of the games where he played as corner, so I can't really comment much on him playing that position. But yeah, I think it makes sense if it's kind of a best player available and not set to a Dolphins kind of standard where it's maybe once they get to the 5th round, it's a uniform best player available and no longer have kind of their needs as much input into it. So we got before we get on to undrafted free agents, we got one question from David Bullen. So he just wants to know our thoughts on how the O-line and D-lines are shaping up. So I guess do you want to go on the D-line first and kind of
sure.
say how you feel about that, and I can hit on that O-line, although we already kind of have a bit with Jamal talk.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, compared to the end of 2014, it's much stronger. And I think that's, that offseason's pretty much wrapped up. Maybe just a couple more signings here as we get through the weekend. But, I like Jordan Phillips. Again, I don't love him for what he will probably be. Again, 200 to maybe 300 snap guy. I'm thinking just off, just kind of off the top of my head for what they did last year, maybe a little bit more. Block eater.
Something.
Oh.
Well, sorry, something just popped up. I can
turn that porn off.
Or Patriots website.
Oh, garbage. No, I like it. I think the defensive line's pretty strong now. Phillips isn't an immediate impact guy. I thought it was really interesting how Michael Bennett from Ohio State fell so far. I would have liked to have seen Miami take a flyer on him, especially because it came out that teams just weren't that high on him, which I thought that was crazy. Like pass rushing 3-tech, he's basically like a mini Geno Atkins. Like not quite as dominant, obviously, but similar skill set. That's insane to me. I mean, what do you go, like 6th round to the Jaguars? That's crazy. But I think Miami's pretty set. Like, especially if Phillips can develop any type of pass rush, it's going to be a really scary group.
And then with O-line, I guess there's kind of 4 spots that we think are kind of locked, which will be left tackle Albert, center Pouncey, right guard Billy, right tackle James, and then it's kind of a battle between Dallas, Jamal Douglas, and Lickenback in theory. So I guess that's what you're kind of looking at. And then to me, that's kind of a nicely balanced offensive line if you look at Billy and hopefully Jamal Douglas as your kind of players to run behind, and they're going to be getting into the second level onto linebackers. And then you have kind of the 2 athletic tackles pass protecting. It's basically built, if Albert's healthy, you're going to have a top 10 or so offensive line as soon as he goes down. If they do slide James back to left tackle, it's going to get ugly pretty quickly. And that's just down to Albert gives you so much space where then, because he was just so good, he allows other people to kind of make mistakes, allow pressure, but there's still Tannehill always knows he has somewhere we can step into. You saw as soon as James went over to the other side, although Dallas may be being beaten the quickest, James was getting beaten as well, and so that meant that if Tannehill was stepping up to avoid the pressure from his right-hand side, he was stepping into the arse of James or the arse of Dan College or the arse of Satelli. So wherever he would step, he's stepping into pressure. So kind of having a tackle that you can put on an island and trust, and then you can move your kind of protections around. That's just a huge thing. And I know there's a lot of people that wanted us to draft a left tackle higher in case Albert goes down, but really you can't do much about if your best player goes down on offense. You're going to be much worse, and that's kind of the position. You're not going to be able to have another. I mean, Albert was playing as a top 5 left tackle last year until he went down. He was really good. You can't find. I mean, there's terrible tackles starting in the NFL, so you can't have a comparable backup. That's just not a realistic aspiration. So it'll be interesting, kind of, if they've learned from that and they put Fox at left tackle, or if Albert goes down, just kind of.
Yeah, and that's what it really comes down to. Like, it's not reasonable to sit there and devote like if an early round pick to a what if scenario. Some teams, some teams can do it. We saw Cincinnati do it. They added a couple offensive linemen. They needed offensive line, but they took a couple of value.
They're in a slightly different position where both their tackles are entering free agency next year. Yeah. So they're kind of, although it's not an immediate need, it's a soon-to-be need. Yeah,
and they also have one of the deepest rosters in the NFL. That's what you can do after years of good drafting. Miami's just in probably year 2 of good drafting. So, it's going to take some time, and that's all you can say. You have to fill the other holes first, and then a what-if scenario. Maybe that's where La'el Collins comes in. I have no idea if Miami's interested in him, but that was really the only guy that they really could have realistically added that didn't have like a crazy health flag.
Well, then, as you're talking about La'el Collins, maybe we can get into undrafted free agents. So Collins won't be signing with a team until Monday, I think Rappaport reported. So kind of you can stop tweeting people about how they should sign him. And whether he does sign or not, I mean, it won't be that interesting. But obviously, there was kind of, I think it was during the presser, people were asking whether, or clearly the signing of Phillips and not going after any linebackers mean that the Dolphins were upset with how the defensive line performed and content with the linebacker play. Well, if you look at the undrafted free agents, they're clearly not that content with the linebacker play, as they've already brought in 4 linebackers. So do you want to go through kind of a couple of them? Maybe we'll start with like Hull, who I have graded as the highest of the group. To me, he's kind of like a really poor man's Eric Kendricks, where he's kind of an instinctive player, probably can only play middle linebacker. I don't think he's athletic enough to play will. He's got a good grasp of zone coverage. If you listen back to the podcast with Kyle Krabs, I kind of talked about him a bit there. He had a really good game, I believe, against Ohio State. You may remember that better than me, Ian, where he was just everywhere and like Twitter was blowing up about him. Was that Ohio State? I assume it was. It's like a big game, and everyone was watching Hack versus that defense. And he was just in the backfield the whole time in that game. Pretty good tackle form. It's just kind of, for most of the league, he's undersized. That's not as much of an issue for the Dolphins because they covered that ability in zone more, and the ability to kind of fight through move through the trash instead of kind of disengage blockers. And with Sue taking up more offensive linemen, there's going to be less kind of big bodies on him. And he's kind of for the Dolphins, he's actually a prototype size. He's if you read anything about him, it'll say he's undersized. Then kind of the opposite player, I guess, is Luke from Cincinnati. So do you want to say any comments about him and kind of his game and whether he's a fit or just kind of I see him as a scout team kind of guy personally.
Yeah, and I think just as a whole, they got Jeff Luke. Jeff Luke could be he might be a fullback move. That was kind of like the word throughout the process that some teams liked him as a fullback. I think Miami just kind of added some guys that were highly productive in college, first of all. Second of all, they lost Jason Trusnick. And so any of these guys that can help on special teams, I think that's really going to help their case to make the final roster. Like you had mentioned before, Neville Hewitt and Vigil, the guy from Utah State, those guys might be more of outside linebackers than middle linebackers. So, I think Luke and Hall could both, challenge for that backup spot. They're all kind of limited in their own ways, which is why they went undrafted. And inside linebacker isn't super premium of a position across the league. But overall, I like Hall's game. I saw a lot of him. He's got pretty good speed downhill. He's a good blitzer on broken plays. He attacks the line of scrimmage really well. Very smart player and very in control of his body, which is good to see. He's pretty efficient with his movements. Not very blessed in terms of athletically. His upside, in coverage, he can do things a little. I think he can do things a little bit better than Trusnick did. Trusnick was a real eyesore in coverage. I think Hall is smoother than Trusnick was. So if you're comparing that, it's still the upside. It wouldn't be as a starter. I wouldn't say. Ideally, if he's starting, you're still going to have issues. Same for a guy like Jeff Luke. He's a 2-down hammer if he stays at linebacker. I do prefer him as an undrafted guy than I would Denzel Perryman as a second rounder, just because I think they're very similar skill sets. If you're looking for that type of body and if you're looking for that type of effectiveness, you're going to get a similar type player. Vigil had some really good stats. I didn't watch him too in depth before the process. Before even this weekend.
He's just a kind of a will linebacker is kind of his limitation. Just because I don't think he doesn't have the athleticism to get through trash. And even then, he'll probably be more a special teamer, and then maybe third team, like the fourth playoff game, he'll get kind of his most snaps. He did tackle a lot. I think he had 130 or so tackles, so he put up big numbers, but he's not particularly anything special, really, just kind of a solid camp body. Then I guess one guy who's kind of interesting going on to the defensive line is Ray Drew, Georgia defensive end. He played kind of ends and tackle in a 4-3. And I believe he also played some 5-tech. I prefer him as kind of like a 3 to 5-tech. He's probably 6'4" and a bit. So the NFL might list him as 6'5", close to 300 pounds. So he's kind of a big body pass rusher, interior pass rusher. For me, I think I like his burst off the snap. It's not elite, but it's good. He's got kind of some leg power there, so that's nice. He's not the greatest edge rusher, so that's kind of why he didn't look great as a 4-3 end. I would imagine just from kind of his athletic traits that he'd be a really highly thought of prospect, and was really underwhelming. But I know that kind of lots of people liked Anthony Johnson last year. As an undrafted free agent, I would say that Drew maybe has more physical gifts and upside as kind of a 3-5 technique. So he could be an interesting player just to look out for. Have you got any thoughts on Drew, or should we move to the special team controversy?
I never watched him play. I do remember kind of early in the season, I was looking up mock drafts and stuff to kind of see new prospects to watch, and it was interesting because he was getting mocked like top 10 like a year ago, and again, I don't really know anything about him.
So yeah, I think that's where I first saw his name, and that's why I linked it to kind of recruiting, because you'll often see guys that are really early touted prospects. They'll be like 5-star recruits, but not necessarily good. So he could be a kind of a player in which, if we get the same kind of impact from our new defensive line coaches and veteran group as we did Casey Rogers, he could be a player that could kind of step up and be good. So I guess we'll get to kicker and punter news. So we've got I can't remember their names, but we've got a punter and a kicker have come in. The punter from I think it was Draft Ortiz. I'm trying to find the tweet. He might have deleted it, but anyway, he was telling me he was like a top, like the #1 punter recruit for Arizona State and USC, and a couple of people have told me he's a directional punter, so and has a good leg. So I guess if you're looking at from a way to clear some cap room, having a camp battle at punter is a good way to free up a couple of million. So that could be something interesting to look at. And we also brought in another kicker, so I think we have 3 place kickers. Someone sent me, if you look in my mentions, someone sent me a video. I'm not going to watch kicker videos. I don't know what the hell, how to evaluate kickers. Partly because I think we saw like the workout place Sturgis was pre-draft. He was kicking like 75-yard field goals. So I don't think kind of highlight videos of kickers in shorts is a great way to find out if someone's a good kicker or not. But I think it's worth kind of highlighting that they're not content with kind of spending $5 million on specialists. So we might see a lot. Maybe we see Luke turn into a long snapper or something. So there's something to kind of look out for, long snappers, and we'll have a all new special teams core. So that'll be fun. Have you seen any other names mentioned with the Dolphins undrafted free agency class so far? That kind of we brought in a couple of tackles or guards. Mike Lindecki, I think is his name. I think is Illinois State. So he's probably an interior player. He's a bit shorter, a 6'4", but tested quite well. He met my O-line metric, but I just didn't think he was very good. So I had him as an undrafted free agent, but he kind of athletically fit. And then there was also the tackle Balkus. He's like a 4-year starting left tackle. He's huge. He's like 6'7", 6'8". Just a solid player, nothing special, but he'll be a good kind of camp body to. You just need kind of people that are consistent and play a lot, and that was a trend with the Packers where they would just, if you were a 4-year starter at left tackle, you would be you would be on their board at least, regardless, just as it shows that you're a pretty good athlete at a young age, and are consistent. So I haven't really seen any more players linked. Have you heard any more? Oh, there's that one wide receiver from Maine. Have you got any thoughts on him?
I just know that he was like an athletic freak type guy. I think he had like the 3rd highest Spark score, which is something that Zach Whitman on Twitter does. Other than that, I haven't seen the guy play, but he's definitely one of those guys that you like to see brought in as a UDFA, just for the athletic upside. You're just hoping that there's actually some receiving skill there, but I really haven't ever seen him play, and probably don't plan on it.
And then, so are there any other guys you'd like to target in undrafted free agency that you think would be good additions? I guess we haven't had any quarterbacks come in, even though they've had quite a few visits. There's a couple of running backs, wide receivers still out there. I was about to mention Fua, but he just became a Cardinal, so he's off the board. The Dolphins showed some interest in him. But is there anyone else that you'd be kind of interested in? I think there's quite a few interesting quarterbacks, at least.
Yeah, I'd like to see a guy like Chris Bonner at quarterback. That's really about it, though. I mean, there were some good UDFA guys available. We're seeing a lot of them get snatched up pretty quickly already.
So Kevin White's a Falcon. I guess he would have been a good one. And Deshazor Everett is with Tampa now, so he's another guy who kind of fit in that same ilk. Marcus Rush is a 49er.
Yep.
Curtis Drummond to the Texans. The Eagles got Bunch, who I think is a really great fit for that O-line. Sean Hickey to the Saints, so they're getting another tackle, and that's a pretty good fit. So there are some pretty good players. It'll be interesting. I don't think I've seen. Just check because I ticked off some players before. I think Wes Saxon is off. I believe. Oh yeah, he went to the Jets. So that was one player they were kind of interested in. But maybe they'll be looking at a tight end at some point with still Gabe Holmes, the player out of Purdue who was really good a couple of years ago. It's just been hurt a lot. But he's really interesting. So that could be a name to look out for. I don't think Xavier Williams, did he get drafted?
He did not get drafted.
So he's still out there. He could be interesting. And Nick Marshall, maybe, if they're moving wide receivers to defensive back, maybe they'll do that with Nick Marshall too. And then he could also play some quarterback as well if you don't want to pay him. Well, I guess already paid Matt Moore, but if you want to have kind of a developmental player there, then Kevin Parks would be one other player I'd kind of bring up as he would already know the running game, knows Laser well from Virginia, so he could be a player in which they bring in just because they know him, and he's a good pass catching back, built like a little bowling ball. He could be an interesting player that they kind of have some history with. And John Cockrell, the North Dakota State running back. So he obviously has a history. Billy, they brought him in, I believe, to a visit. So it's another player they've showed interest in. So he may be someone they look at. And obviously last year they had pretty good success with undrafted running backs. So have you got any other kind of thoughts on today's draft other than lots of teams took lots of bad players?
That's pretty much it. Sad it's over. Man, it's always a fun 3 days, but this seemed to fly by. And, it was really a shitty class overall. I mean, I think that's the main takeaway. It's like there were literally teams on day 2 taking guys that I watched 3 games on, and I said, there's not an NFL talent in that player. And so, it's one of those classes where...
breaking news. Christian Jones, the Alabama wideout, has just become a Dolphin.
Ooh, I like that.
Let me just find my notes on him.
He's a return man. Didn't he do some... I think he did some returns. He was a highly recruited guy. Never really put it all together, but in spurts in college. Trying to bring up his stats. Yeah, so he's a little guy. He's 5'11", 187. Return numbers are really good. 1,700 yards over basically 2.5 years returns. That's on kick returns. Punt returns, 719 yards basically in 3 years. 4 combined touchdowns. Receiving threat, never had more than 368 yards. That was more of an exposure thing, and I think just like injuries kind of held him back. So I think that's actually pretty interesting as like a flyer.
And at least it'll take some kind of hits off Landry in preseason return wise, and the DBs. I guess there's no one else that's kind of a proven returner, and maybe Brent Grimes will stop taking returns in preseason. So yeah, I think that's at least there's some use for him. Athletically, he's not anything kind of particularly special. He could maybe, if they really wanted to play him in the slot, he's actually quite similar to Landry, and he's not particularly fast, but he's kind of got like at least kind of like a fluid lower body. But yeah, I think he's more agile than like an explosive or fast player. So that kind of helps in the return game, being able to kind of slide through things. So I think that if you want to follow any more of undrafted free agent people come in, follow Mike Locotto at NEPD_LOYKO. He does a great job every year putting stuff together. And his website's pretty good, where it just has kind of a list of everyone that's a free agent. Unfortunately, he's a Patriots fan, but you have to follow them once a year at least. And thanks for joining us these last 3 days for the draft. There's been some ups and downs and not much sleep, and quite a lot of booze for me in particular. So we'll have back to a regular show next week. And feel free to anytime ask any questions, and if they're good, we'll answer them for you. Ian, is there any passing words or things you have coming up in the next week or so?
It's time to move on to 2016.
Hackenberg loaded up. So we're going to be watching lots of Penn State, and Ian's going to be hating it. So you can follow Ian at NFL Film Study. You can follow the pod at Miami Pod, and all of the shows are up at the miamipod.com. Big shout out as always to Romania. You listen to us the fourth most of any country, so thank you, Romania. And Canada, watch your back. They're coming for you.
Creeping in.
Yeah. Well, enjoy basketball and boxing, everyone, and we'll see you next week.